All right. Well, it's 101. People keep coming in, but just for the sake of time, we'll get started. So thank you all for coming back to these speaker sessions. So Karin Pasqua from Meaningful Access Consulting will be doing this session, and it'll be about going beyond accessibility and looking closely at how designing inclusively creates environments where we all can see ourselves reflected in our communities to help create a sense of connection. So over to you, Karin.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I'll just dive in quickly here. That's a great overview. Thank you. Quickly, who am I? Well, I'm Karin Pasqua. I have over 20 years experience working alongside the disability community. My passion is beautiful functional design where everyone is included, everyone can participate, and everyone can access the places that they play, learn, live, work, and function as a community. I like to joke that I'm part engineer, part occupational therapist, seeing a barrier to access and finding the creative solution is kind of my favorite thing to do. So I'd love to just share with you a little bit today about how inclusive design is the path forward to making sure that we're all involved in our community and coming out of this period of extreme isolation to make sure that we're all just connecting and rebuilding those connections to our community. My partner, my husband Marco, is a person with a disability. So we certainly live, work, and play this life of able-bodied meets disability perspective, and I hope to share that with you today. So we will quickly talk about why meaningful access matters, and I do use meaningful access as a synonym for universal design, and we'll talk about that later. So what is accessibility and how do we normally think about that? I like to play a little game called Accessibility Gone Wrong, so just to highlight some hopefully inadvertent misses to help you understand this perspective, and then what is universal design, and lastly, how does meaningful access, universal design work to ensure our social and integration. So quickly, my story. So several years ago, let's talk about meaningful access and why that's important and where that's come from. So several years ago, my husband and I, we were headed to a work party in downtown Vancouver, Gastown to be specific. For those of you familiar with the area, you know it is it's older, it has its character, it also has some really wonderful challenges. So we were going to this restaurant and we were assured that the venue was accessible. Fantastic. I didn't feel the need to call. So when we got there, we were told, yes, absolutely, we're accessible. The entrance that works for you is actually around the back in the alley where you'll have to wait for someone to let you in. Oh, okay, no problem. So we go around the alley and we stand there, and I've got my cute dress on, my favorite pair of shoes, and we are left waiting in the alley for about 10 minutes or so in the pouring rain. Meanwhile, our friends had gone in the front entrance, the party was started, and here we are actually just hoping that somebody would remember that we existed outside as we were, ringing the doorbell and patiently hoping that someone would answer the door. So when we finally got in, the server led us down this dodgy hallway and into the service elevator. And, at least we were no longer standing next to a dumpster and needles on the floor. But when we finally got into the restaurant, it had taken us about 20 minutes longer than everybody else. And our friends were wondering where we'd been. And then when we got there, Mark couldn't use the washroom because the washroom was upstairs and the only way to access it was up that flight of stairs. And then the restaurant itself was so jam-packed that he actually couldn't move away from the table he was seated at. So after all of these points of barriers that we experienced, we really just felt that we were kind of stuck and we had no interest in going back to that venue ever again. Yes, the venue was accessible, but there was no meaningful accessibility to it. Marco and therefore myself, we couldn't participate along with all of our colleagues and our friends. We couldn't do half the activities that were planned for us. Now I think back and I know how I felt. I kind of love that story. I love sharing that story with people because it was early on in our relationship and it was just like this kind of life mini game that we had to circumvent. But then I think about it, how did Marco feel? There was shame, discouragement, disillusionment. He genuinely felt like he wasn't included, and he had no interest in going back again. How does this relate to isolation and to accessibility? Well, quite simply, it's not really his journey anymore. It's our journey together. And now we have a daughter who comes along on this journey. So we think about stroller access. And really, the point of this is that he should have the right to have as equal an experience as you or I or anybody else. So when we design universally, it's more than just about getting in the building. It's actually about creating that equitable experience for everybody. And that's why it matters, because we are all people, and people deserve to be treated like people and not stand in an alley ruining their shoes. I joke about the shoes, but I am a little bit sore about that. I love that pair of shoes. So when we talk about, is it accessible? Like, what does that really mean? I often think about accessibility, you slap a ramp on a building and you're like, cool, we're accessible. But I hope that story that I just shared actually highlights why we need to do better. And it's not just about people who use wheelchairs. When we talk about, is it accessible? The next question that comes to my mind is to whom? Is it accessible to our elders, our seniors who don't identify as having a disability? Is it accessible to those with mobility device needs, balance needs, anxiety, depression, ADHD, other neurodiversities, other hidden disabilities? We really have to think about all of us. And here's a little thing that you may not have thought about. I like to say that we're all temporarily able-bodied. We all have a range of needs that may change tomorrow. So if we think long-term, then we're all included. Increasing accessibility means reducing barriers. Absolutely. It might be providing information so that people know for themselves whether it's accessible. It might be adaptations, accommodations, technologies, taking measurements, making changes. These are all elements that improve accessibility and work towards universal design. So let's talk about accessibility. This venue is accessible. It has a ramp, but is it functional? No, I would not agree that that is functional. The way that truck is able to park, it actually cuts the ramp in half, meaning that a stroller or someone using a mobility device can't walk up that or can't utilize that ramp. How about this one? Who is this accessible for? There's certainly not a straight passage, a walkway there. A mobility device user is going to trip and cause an accident, an injury. So this is why accessibility is not quite the target that we're going for. Oh, my favorite strap in the entire world. Please no, 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 no. This attempt at universal design actually just increased barriers and tripping hazards, and it's actually quite terrifying for somebody with a mobility device to access, and for many seniors as well. So continuing on, I'm sorry, I'm having to blaze through this information very quickly. What is universal design? Well, it is the design and composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, used to the greatest extent of people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. Now that sounds a little utopic, but in fact, it already exists. Many of us have already been in spaces like this, spaces like YVR that have done an incredible job with their design. They leverage design elements like carpeting versus flooring. Next time you're at YVR, listen to how quiet it is. It's one of the few airports in the world that's genuinely quiet. They're not making announcements every couple minutes. The entire purpose of that is to support people with anxiety, especially getting on and off a flight. It can be very anxiety producing, but having that quiet environment supports people. And it makes people feel included. So somebody navigating with a white cane can actually use the difference in flooring features to help navigate. Did you know that at YVR, the areas of restaurants and commercial stores are wood, whereas the routes to the gates are actually tile? That is done intentionally, so someone can actually feel the difference with a white cane. And that's why design can be done so beautifully, so thoughtfully, and include so many people. Another favorite example of mine is the Jumpstart Inclusive Playground in Surrey. So again, when we think about spaces, we think perhaps about one user group, but when we design universally and we think about these principles, we can actually create places where everybody belongs. So you might think of a playground as a space for a child to play, and you think about a child with a disability. But now My husband can take our able-bodied daughter to a park and have a great time. It is probably one of the few places in the Lower Mainland he can successfully take her on his own. And that matters. Having the parent with a disability participate matters. And ensuring that our elders, our grandparents can participate, that's where we start breaking down those barriers to isolate, to why people are isolated. So very quickly, making my pitch for universal design, aside from the fact that we can create spaces and products that are absolutely beautiful and functional, we think about how it supports all of us, whether that's today or tomorrow. We never know what's going to happen to our health, whether we're in an accident, or whether our needs change, or whether we have needs that are similar to those who identify as having a disability, but even if we don't identify that way ourselves. There's certainly a business case. Many of us have wallets in our pockets, and we want to spend the money in places that welcome us. We want to prepare for future legislation and have the community reflected. We want to see ourselves reflected in the places that we do business and that we spend time. As I mentioned, we're all temporarily able-bodied. We just don't know for how long. I'm hoping to be an active senior down the road, but if I'm going to use a cane, I'm going to rock that cane too. It also supports people aging in place. Being connected to our community is one of the facets of healthcare that we kind of forget about. Reducing isolation helps us live longer and be connected to each other. Those social components that when we have a space that welcomes everybody and is truly inclusive, then all of us belong and we can all support each other. And there you have my extraordinarily quick overview of why universal design matters and why we should ensure that all of us are able to be represented in the areas that we live, work, play, and learn. I hope you enjoyed, and I am happy to take some questions.
All right, I don't see any of the chat, but if anyone wants to unmute and ask Karin any questions, we've got a few minutes before our next Inspire talk. Or feel free to put things in the chat as well.
Or if there's any moments of thoughtfulness or something that reflected well for you.
Well, we've got one in the chat. Do you see it, Karin?
Yes, great question. So great question about that is, so one of the misunderstandings around accessibility is that there is a significant cost to it. And while there can be, if your building is extremely inaccessible, for the most part, most people's work accommodations cost no more than $500 to accommodate somebody with a disability. There might be other ways that you can accommodate or provide meaningful access depending on people's needs. There's certainly very creative ways. There's free technologies, things like allowing captions to be turned on during Zoom meetings. That's free. That's a way of including additional people, having transcriptions available for people. There's lots of technology that can be utilized to make sure that people are included. And one of the best ways that you can start is actually just asking everybody if there are accommodations that they require, or if there's anything that can be done to support their best efforts of work. That might even just be like a quieter room, or the ability to work part-time from home, for instance. But if you have any specific concerns, I'd love to have you reach out and we can kind of discuss that more, and perhaps I can help you problem solve some specific challenges. But budget is always one of those tricky questions. We all don't have enough money.